Welcome back. How long have you been watching my channel? Let me know below.
You ever have one of those moments where it feels like the air's been punched clean out of your chest, but no one around you notices because they're all too busy laughing in the sunshine, like everything's just peachy? That was me, sitting on the worn leather couch in my living room, sipping cold coffee that tasted like betrayal. I was scrolling through Instagram like I do every other evening when the house gets quiet and the loneliness starts to creep in through the drywall. I wasn't looking for anything, just killing time, really. But what I found hit me so hard, I thought for a second my eyes were playing tricks. There they were, my entire family, smiling in a group selfie on a beach in Maui, leis around their necks, drinks in hand, tan lines and all. The kind of photo that screams, life is perfect, and we're loving every minute. My mom, my dad, my sister Melissa, with her smug little grin, and her unemployed, permanently confused husband Derek, all standing in front of a resort that probably cost more for a weekend than I make in a month. And the caption? Oh, that was the cherry on top. So blessed to spend time with my favorite people in paradise. Hatch family first. Hat aloha vibes. There's a moment where your brain tries to catch up to what your eyes already understand. I just stared, frozen, scrolling through the rest of the carousel, them at a luau, Melissa snorkeling, Mom wrapped in a beach towel drinking from a coconut. Post after post, every one of them felt like a slap. Not because they were having fun, but because I wasn't supposed to know. Because no one thought to invite me, or even mention it. I sat there in silence for maybe 10 minutes, maybe 10 years, I couldn't tell you which, until I did the one thing I knew I shouldn't. I called my mom. It rang twice before she picked up, her voice bright and chipper like she didn't have a damn care in the world. Oh, hi, sweetheart, everything okay? Are you in Hawaii? I didn't say hello, didn't ask how she was. My voice was tight, almost foreign in my own mouth. There was a pause. Not long, but just long enough for guilt to slip in and out. Oh, yes, we are. We didn't tell you because, well, we didn't want to upset Melissa. It was like time folded in on itself. That was her excuse. That was the explanation for why I, the one who's always been there, who's never asked for anything, got excluded from a family vacation I would have killed to be a part of, because it would upset my sister. You didn't want to upset Melissa, I repeated, just to make sure I heard her right, as if she'd suddenly take it back. But she didn't. You know how she gets, and things have been so tense lately. We just wanted this to be a peaceful getaway. Peaceful, that word coming from her, tasted rotten. So let me get this straight. Peace, in their definition, meant pretending I didn't exist. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I just let the silence hang between us like a noose. She and Derek are living in my duplex, I said flatly. Rent-free, for over 2 years, but I wasn't invited because you were worried it would ruin her mood? Oh, honey, don't be like that. But I'd already hung up. I stared at my phone, waiting for the heat to pass from my face, for the ache in my chest to turn into something useful. And that's when it hit me. Not just the injustice of it, but the pattern. The never-ending goddamn cycle of me being the stable one, the dependable one, the adult in the room, while Melissa got to be the emotional wreck who everyone tiptoed around. I gave, and they took. And when I didn't give enough, I got punished with silence, with erasure, so I drove. I didn't even think about it. I just grabbed my keys and drove to the property, my old duplex where they'd been living for free under the lie of a rough patch that had somehow turned into 26 months of unpaid rent, yard damage, and passive-aggressive texts about needing just a little more time. I parked outside, engine idling, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. The porch light was on. I could hear music playing from inside. Laughter, too. Derek's stupid laugh. The one that always sounds like he's never had a serious thought in his life. I sat there staring at that door, wondering what it would feel like to finally say what I needed to say. To stop playing the good daughter, the forgiving sister, the one who keeps everything together while everyone else tramples her boundaries. Would it feel like revenge? Like freedom? Or maybe both? And here's where I want to ask you, because maybe you've been here too. Maybe you've kept your mouth shut for too long, hoping one day they'd see your worth without you having to spell it out. Tell me, when is it too late to fight back? When is the moment you stop asking for love and start demanding respect? I didn't go in that night. I sat there for over an hour, in the dark, listening to their life play out inside the walls I paid for. And I made a decision, not with rage, but with the kind of cold clarity that only comes when the last straw finally breaks. This wasn't about a vacation. It was about every single time I bit my tongue so someone else could stay comfortable. So the next morning, I did what I should have done 2 years ago. I wrote up the eviction notice. There's something uniquely corrosive about being the reliable one. The person everyone leans on, the one who pays the bills, shows up on time, keeps their voice steady when things fall apart, and always puts others first. Not because it's appreciated, but because if you don't, no one else will. You do it for so long that it starts to feel like your identity, like you were made for it, like you were born to be the foundation other people stand on to reach their comfort. But the truth is, that foundation cracks. Not all at once like in movies, but slowly with hairline fractures that deepen over time. Until one day, everything caves in with the smallest, most ridiculous push. For me, that push wasn't the vacation. Not really. That was just the trigger. The real collapse had been building for decades. In silence, in dismissals, in 1,000 small betrayals no one ever thought I'd remember. It started early, so early that by the time I realized what was happening, the roles had already been assigned and the audience had taken their seats. Melissa was the delicate one, the sensitive soul, the girl with big feelings and a flair for drama that my mother insisted was just passion. I was the opposite. The steady hand, the straight-A student, the one who could be left alone without supervision or praise. I remember one Christmas when I was 13 and Melissa was 11. She threw a tantrum because the sweater Mom bought her wasn't the exact shade of pink she liked. And when I tried to calm her down, Mom snapped at me and told me to stop making things worse. That was my introduction to the unwinnable game of being reasonable in a family that rewarded chaos. As we got older, the pattern didn't just hold, it calcified. When Melissa rear-ended someone while texting and totaled her car at 19, it was my fault for not setting a better example. When I graduated college with honors, my parents left the ceremony early because Melissa had a really bad therapy appointment that she couldn't do alone. When Dad's back surgery drained their savings, and I volunteered to take over their monthly mortgage payment for 6 months, Mom said, "You're such a blessing." And then, within the same breath, asked if I could also float Melissa and Derek a little money since they were between jobs again. And I did it. I did all of it, quietly, because it was easier than arguing, because I believed that being dependable meant not keeping score. But now I realize that not keeping score only works when everyone's playing the same game, and they weren't. They were bleeding me dry, slowly, with smiles and guilt, and that infuriating tone of voice that says, "Well, you're just better at handling things." 2 years ago, when Melissa and Derek showed up on my doorstep with half-packed bags and stories about a landlord who was out to get them, I let them move into the duplex I inherited from my grandmother. It wasn't much, 2 bedrooms, a faded kitchen, but it was clean, safe, and in a decent neighborhood. I told them it was temporary, just a couple of months to help them get back on their feet. Melissa hugged me so tight I could feel the wetness of her tears on my neck, and Derek mumbled something about how they'd be out by summer. That was 26 months ago. Since then, they haven't paid a dime. Not for rent, not for utilities, not even for the broken sink they insisted, just fell apart. I never charged them officially, never drew up paperwork, because part of me still believed the old lie, that helping family meant not asking for anything in return. But I paid for the repairs. I mowed the lawn when Derek couldn't get around to it. I covered the property tax. And in return, I got passive-aggressive texts about how tight things are right now and requests for just a little more time. And I gave it every time, because that's what I do. But the moment I saw that beach photo, the moment I realized they were soaking up the sun in paradise while I was home paying the gas bill on the house they squatted in, I felt something crack so cleanly inside me it almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was ridiculous. The gall. The absolute gall of it. To exclude me. To pretend I was the problem. To spend my money and then pretend I was too difficult to be around. The next morning, I printed the eviction notice from a template I found online. I adjusted the language to be polite but firm, even though every fiber of my being wanted to scream into the page. I walked to the print shop, had 3 copies made, and slipped one into a manila envelope like I was sealing the fate of someone who'd underestimated me for the very last time. I held on to it for 2 days before delivering it, not because I hesitated, but because I wanted to give myself space to savor the shift. I wanted to feel the full weight of choosing myself. They'd had their fun, their vacation, their comfort. And now it was time to come home to reality. Because the truth is, I hadn't been the good sister. I'd been the doormat. And the thing about doormats is, they look nice until you realize they're covered in footprints no one ever bothered to wipe off. Well, this one was getting cleaned. And anyone who didn't like it could find another porch to wipe their lies on. The day I delivered the eviction notice was not marked by thunder or lightning. No dramatic downpour. No cinematic background to match the storm that had been brewing inside me for months, even years. In fact, it was just another Tuesday. Quiet, slightly overcast, a bit of wind. The kind of day where most people are preoccupied with picking up dry cleaning or debating what to make for dinner, which somehow made what I was about to do feel even more surreal, as if the world was too indifferent to the personal reckoning about to unfold inside the little beige duplex that had become my own private battleground. I stood at the front steps for several minutes, envelope in hand, listening to the distant hum of a lawnmower a few houses down and the faint rhythm of some pop song bleeding out through the closed living room window. And I remember thinking, not for the first time, that they had managed to turn my grandmother's house, a place once filled with handmade Afghans, ceramic birds, and the warm scent of bread baking at 4 o'clock, into something unrecognizable, cluttered with plastic lawn chairs, cigarette butts, and the kind of energy that feels more squat than sanctuary. I knocked, not loud, just enough to be heard over the music. And a moment later, Derek opened the door wearing a t-shirt that had clearly not seen a washer in a few days, and a look that suggested I'd interrupted something very important, like a midday nap or his 6th round of whatever video game had been keeping him from job hunting for over 2 years. His eyes flicked down to the envelope in my hand, then back up to my face, and in that half-second, I saw it, the flicker of recognition, of dread, of the realization that I was not here for a social call or to drop off a 6-pack and chat about the good old days. "What's this?" he asked, his tone already defensive, like someone who knew exactly what it was and was hoping to delay the inevitable by pretending otherwise. "I think you know what it is, Derek," I said, holding the envelope out to him. Steady hand, steady voice, even though my heart was pounding so loudly I half expected him to hear it. He took it slowly, like it might explode in his hand, and as he began to open it, Melissa appeared behind him, barefoot, arms crossed, her face a practiced blend of confusion and contempt. The same look she used to give me when we were teenagers, and I dared to speak up about something that made her uncomfortable. "You've got to be kidding me," she said, not even waiting to read the paper. Not needing to, because Melissa was always 10 steps ahead when it came to emotional warfare. She didn't need facts. She just needed a stage. "I'm not kidding," I replied calmly, though every muscle in my body wanted to shake her by the shoulders and ask her how she could possibly not see the absurdity of it all. "You've got 60 days to vacate. I've already spoken to an attorney. It's legal. It's final." Melissa laughed, a short, sharp bark of disbelief, and then she stepped forward, crowding the threshold like she was trying to block the very air from passing between us. "You're evicting your own family?" She spat, her voice rising now, already tilting toward hysterical. After everything we've been through? The phrasing was almost impressive in its manipulation. We've been through. As if this had been a shared struggle. As if I hadn't been the one footing every bill, absorbing every guilt trip, swallowing every slight for years, while she and Derek lived like squatters who thought gratitude was something owed in the other direction. I'm enforcing a boundary that should have been in place a long time ago, I said, and in that moment, I felt something shift inside me. Not just anger, not just hurt, but a kind of bone-deep clarity that was more liberating than any vacation in Hawaii could ever hope to be. Derek, silent until now, finally spoke, his voice low and dripping with a kind of righteous indignation I didn't know he was capable of summoning. "After everything we've done for you, Matt?" he asked. And the sheer absurdity of the statement almost made me laugh out loud. "We helped you keep this place from falling apart. We gave it life. You act like we're just freeloaders." I stared at him, this man who'd lived under my roof without paying a single bill, who had let the yard grow wild until I hired a gardener myself, who'd left pizza boxes stacked in the kitchen for so long the smell clung to the drywall like mildew. And I said very quietly, very clearly, "You are freeloaders." There was no comeback, just silence, the kind that stretches and tightens until it snaps. Melissa looked at me then, really looked, and something behind her eyes flickered, rage maybe, or fear, or that dawning realization that for the first time in her life, the person she had always counted on to back down simply wasn't going to. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice shaking now, no longer theatrical, but genuinely unmoored. "Mom's not going to forgive you for this. You're tearing this family apart." That part stung, not because I believed it, but because I'd heard it before. Versions of it whispered in passive-aggressive tones across dinner tables, behind closed doors, during late-night phone calls, where I was always the villain in someone else's story for daring to want peace instead of pleasing everyone else. "I'm not tearing the family apart," I said, turning to leave. "I'm just refusing to be the glue that holds together a lie." As I walked away, their voices rose behind me, overlapping, shouting things I didn't care to hear. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I had delivered the reckoning, and whether they liked it or not, it had begun. By the time I got back to my house, my phone had already started buzzing, texts, missed calls, voicemails from my mother, my aunt, even my cousin Rachel, who I hadn't spoken to since she borrowed my stand mixer and never returned it. Word was spreading, the story was mutating, and I knew, without a doubt, that the version making the rounds wasn't going to be kind to me, but for the first time in a very, very long while, I didn't care. Because I hadn't chosen kindness. I had chosen myself. And the fallout? That was their problem, not mine. If there's one thing I've learned about family, and I mean the kind of family where dysfunction is dressed up in matching Christmas pajamas and passive aggression is served right alongside the sweet potatoes, it's that the moment you stop playing the role they've boxed you into, the entire fragile ecosystem begins to convulse like a beehive that's just been kicked over. Not because what you did was wrong, but because you had the audacity to change the rules mid-game without asking permission from the people who never followed them in the first place. I didn't even have to wait a full 24 hours before the backlash began, creeping through my phone like a slow-moving virus, starting with a text from my mother that, in all its brevity and cold precision, managed to carry more guilt than a Catholic priest at confession. "I can't believe you do this to your sister. Call me." That was it. No context, no concern, just an unspoken order buried in a reprimand that assumed everything I did was unjustified. And right on cue, the rest followed. Calls from my father's sister, emails from family friends I hadn't spoken to in over a year, and of course, the pièce de résistance. Melissa's carefully curated Facebook post, complete with a filtered photo of her looking weary but noble, standing outside the duplex, with 2 suitcases and a caption that read like a soap opera script. "Sometimes the people you trust the most are the ones who cut you the deepest. We're being forced to leave our home, yes, home, because of a decision we didn't see coming. No hate, just heartbreak. The comments rolled in fast, a tidal wave of sympathy and shared outrage from her circle of enablers. This is so wrong. You deserve better. Families shouldn't treat each other like this. And although I knew better than to engage, knew that defending myself publicly would only feed the drama she was so expertly crafting, I still felt my hands twitch with the desire to type out every single invoice, every missed rent payment, every time I'd bitten my tongue while they lived off my labor like it was some divine inheritance. But I didn't. I let the post stand, let her bask in the glow of faux martyrdom, because deep down, I understood something she didn't. Attention is loud, but truth is quiet. And eventually, it cuts deeper. What surprised me most wasn't her theatrics, because I'd seen that act since we were kids, but the silence of the people who should have known better. My mother, who I once drove to the emergency room at 2 a.m. because she was afraid of a stroke that turned out to be acid reflux. My father, who I supported when he lost his job and spiraled into depression so deep, he didn't leave the house for 3 months. Their silence said everything. Not one of them called to ask me what happened. Not one of them asked why. They just accepted her version and moved on. Because in their world, Melissa's pain always mattered more than my reality. But not everyone stayed silent. My Uncle Gene, my dad's older brother, the one black sheep who'd been sidelined years ago for always stirring the pot, called me out of the blue 3 days later. His voice was gravelly, untouched by sentimentality, the kind of tone that didn't waste time on small talk. I saw the post, he said, had to read it twice, couldn't believe it. I braced myself for the lecture, for the sideways judgment dressed up as concern, but it never came. You did what had to be done, he continued. I always knew you'd be the one to burn the bridge. That line stuck with me, not because it was comforting, but because it was true. I was the one who burned the bridge, not out of spite, but because I was tired of swimming across every time someone else set fire to it and still expecting me to build it back up again, stronger, more indestructible, more giving. His words, though few, were the first crack of light in what had felt like an endless tunnel of self-doubt. Because for days after delivering the eviction, I kept turning the decision over in my mind like a stone, examining it from every angle, wondering if I'd finally become the villain they always said I would be if I ever stopped bending, if I ever let the mask slip. But then I started to notice something else, something quieter but far more telling. People I hadn't heard from in years, cousins, old friends, former neighbors, slowly started reaching out, not publicly, not in grand displays, but through private messages and hushed phone calls, saying things like, I always wondered how you put up with them, or, it's about time someone said no. And in those moments, I realized the silent chorus I'd been part of for years was larger than I thought. That's when I made the final decision. I wasn't just going to evict them. I was going to sell the property altogether. It wasn't just about taking back what was mine. It was about finally letting go of something that had become a symbol of everything I'd sacrificed in the name of peace, my time, my savings, my mental health. I contacted a realtor, had the place listed, and within a week had 3 offers, because even with the overgrown yard and the faint smell of Derek's vape juice, the market was hot and the neighborhood was solid. I took the highest bid, signed the paperwork, and scheduled the closing date for 2 weeks after the eviction deadline. I didn't tell Melissa. I didn't warn her. She'd find out soon enough. The last text I received from my mother before I blocked her number was short, but it cut through me all the same. If you do this, you'll lose your family. And for the first time in my life, I didn't beg to be understood. I didn't plead for them to see me, to believe that I had a reason, that I wasn't just acting out of anger or spite. I simply replied with 5 words that felt like the truest thing I'd ever written. Then maybe I never had one. The day Melissa and Derek finally moved out, I didn't show up, not out of fear or weakness, not because I owed them the grace of distance, but because I had already given too much of myself to a situation that had become less about family and more about penance. And standing there, watching them drag out boxes filled with things they'd collected in a home they never earned, would have felt like reliving every silent moment where I let their comfort override my peace. I received confirmation from the realtor later that afternoon. The keys had been collected, the locks were changed, and the new owner would be moving in within the week. A young couple expecting their first child, excited to start fresh in a place that had, for me, become a monument to every swallowed frustration and every overlooked insult dressed up as just how Melissa is. It was strange, the stillness that followed, not loud or triumphant, but quiet in a way that made me realize how much noise I had grown used to. Emotional noise, logistical noise, the constant hum of resentment that lives beneath the surface when you're always the one who makes things work. I thought I would feel guilt when it was done, that I'd lie awake at night haunted by the image of my sister sitting in some dingy motel, Derek sighing beside her, Mom pacing in the background dialing my number again and again. But instead, I felt something closer to stillness, maybe even peace. Though it wasn't the kind that comes wrapped in closure or wrapped in some neat ending. It was messier, more honest. The kind of peace that arrives when you realize that not every story deserves a happy ending, and not every relationship needs to be saved. I went to the beach that weekend, not Hawaii, obviously, but a cold, stony strip of coast 2 hours north of where I live. The kind of place no one brags about on social media. No palm trees or fancy cocktails, just wind and crashing waves, and the salty smell of a world that doesn't care who you disappointed this week. I took off my shoes, let my feet sink into the wet sand, and for the first time in years, breathed without waiting for someone to need something from me. I didn't take photos, I didn't text anyone, I just stood there, letting the noise leave my body inch by inch. Back home, my phone had become a battlefield of shifting narratives. Melissa had gone quiet on Facebook, which meant her version of the story had started to lose steam. Or maybe she'd finally run out of people willing to believe that being held accountable was the same thing as being attacked. My mother had left 3 voicemails, each one more desperate than the last, starting with disappointment, shifting into concern, and finally landing on something that almost sounded like sorrow. "I didn't know you felt this way," she said in the 3rd message, her voice cracking at the edges in a way that might have broken me 5 years ago. "I thought we were doing what was best. Please, just call me." But I didn't call her back. I didn't answer any of them. Because that part of me, the part that needed them to understand, needed them to apologize in the exact right words with the exact right tone, was gone. What remained was a woman who had learned that sometimes healing doesn't come with reconciliation. Sometimes the apology arrives too late, not just in time, but in growth, in absence, in silence. I watched Melissa's Instagram go dark for 2 weeks before she finally reappeared, posting from a tiny Airbnb outside the city. She and Derek looked tired, not broken, but not nearly as polished as usual, their smiles too tight, their eyes darting toward each other like they weren't quite sure who to blame now that I wasn't in the picture. Her caption was vague, something about new beginnings, about learning who really has your back when things fall apart. But what struck me most wasn't what she said. It was what she didn't. No tag, no mention of family, no swipe-up drama, just her and the emptiness she thought I couldn't survive without. But I did survive. More than that, I started to live again. Not in big dramatic ways. I didn't quit my job or take a solo trip across Europe. I just started saying no. I stopped picking up calls that made my stomach twist. I spent weekends reading, cooking, listening to music I liked, without pretending to like theirs. I gave myself the kind of care I used to reserve for everyone else. And for once, I didn't feel selfish doing it. Because the truth is, I didn't do any of this for revenge. I didn't evict Melissa and Derek to watch them fail, or to prove a point, or to make my mother cry into her coffee. I did it because I was tired of bleeding for people who never once offered me a bandage. I did it because being the responsible one, the reasonable one, the rock, had turned into a cage I built for myself, and I was done living inside it. Do I wish it could have ended differently? Maybe. In some small part of me, The child still wants her mother to show up with open arms and say, "We were wrong. You mattered too." But that's not the story I got. And that's okay, because I wrote my own ending. And in it, I am not the villain. I am not the glue. I am not the collateral damage of someone else's dysfunction. I am simply free. And when I see my phone light up with yet another call from my mother or a message from Melissa I know I'll never open, I don't feel the pull anymore. I don't feel the guilt. I don't feel the panic that used to rise up and whisper, "If you don't fix this, no one will." Instead, I let it ring and I let it go. Because sometimes the most radical thing you can do is nothing at all.